Awesome. We are live. So, first things first, Steve, how does it feel to be on my podcast finally?
It's good. It's like I don't know. I'm like the Jedi Master, and you are my Padawan, and I'm building you up.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because I used to watch almost all of your podcasts, and then I'm finally online with one of my favorite podcast hosts. So, it's kind of a special day today for me.
Yeah, I
So,
mean it's awesome to be on. I love being on the other end. I love just having conversations with people. It's something I really appreciate.
awesome stuff. Yeah, so I was really thinking about, by the way, hi guys, I am live. And the first thing I want to talk about today is I want to introduce Steve to you. But I was really thinking about how should I introduce him because he has like three main roles in my life right now. So on the one side, he's a good friend. I've met him in Birmingham, finally in real life, and then we will meet again in London. And on the other side, he's also my coach right now. So he helps me to get back into shape, to reach the best physique I can reach, the best body composition I can have. So this is his second role, which is pretty important to me. And then at the same time, he's a host of my favorite fitness and bodybuilding podcast on YouTube. So he's the host and founder of the brand Revive Stronger. So if you want to know more how to basically get in shape, how to reach the best body composition you can genetically reach, please go over to the YouTube channel Revive Stronger. I will put the link down below because, in my opinion, I've seen a lot of podcasts, I've seen a lot of coaches online, and with Steve and his brand and his other coaches, you can clearly tell that they want to help people. They have amazing intentions and they know their stuff. So for me, it's a really important podcast today. It's a really important episode, and I'm really grateful that Steve is here. So thank you so much for your time, Steve.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I always say the same whenever people are like, "Oh, where should people head to find out more about you?" I'm always like, "Find out more about me. I'm not that interesting. Go and head over to the podcast and listen to all the amazing experts and guests that I get to chat to because, like you said, their information is invaluable."
Yeah, it's truly a gold mine, to be honest. So what I want to ask you in the beginning of this stream is, before we go into like how to set up a proper gaining phase, how to like gain the most amount of muscle possible, what I want to ask you first is, what is your story? Like, how did you, and also how did you choose the name Revive Stronger for your podcast? Because I know you had a severe injury like a couple of years ago. And the first time I've read your story and I've heard your story, I was like, this is really impressive because, in my opinion, you have a huge transformation behind you. So I really want to talk about that first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the things that I don't talk a lot about, and people are like, where does the name even come from? They just think it sounds kind of catchy and cool or something like that. And it does have a background, and the name for me means a lot. And I kind of talk about Revive Strong as it's kind of an affirmation for me in many ways, in that it's all about kind of getting towards a progressively better place. If you're in a poor position right now, you can revive stronger, as it were. And that's exactly what I did. So I've always been into kind of fitness, health. I used to play a lot of football. I used to do running at university. I continued doing running, football, and I also did weightlifting, and I didn't really know what I was doing at all, but you get the newbie gains, and I built some muscle tissue, which was fine. But during my time at university, I was on one of my typical kind of 10-kilometer runs, which I used to love doing. And I had my Garmin watch on with like heart rate monitor attached to me. I could see kind of everything. And I could see my kind of past personal best. And I was on time for an all-time PB. And this is very much my nature. I love kind of striving to beat my past self. Everyone does, but I'm very stubborn, and I'll kind of push myself almost too much sometimes to
I
try and
can
reach
tell that,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, to reach that next personal best. So what ended up happening on this run was that I was on time for it. So I literally just went, and there was some lights that were flashing amber, which means basically don't go or be very careful about crossing the road. And I just legged it and then looked over my shoulder, and there was a van, and I ended up getting hit by a van during this run. So that left me in hospital for quite a long period of time. I had scarring. I still have scarring, obviously, on my kind of elbows and on my back. I fractured my skull. These were some of the short-term consequences of it, which in reality, very, very minor. But the head injury had a big impact. The doctors think I bruised my pituitary gland. They don't actually know. So whatever it was, it really messed up a lot of hormones. So the first initial thing that ended up happening was I had very low sodium levels. Electrolyte balance within the body. The body's normally very, very good at it. You kind of have a little bit more salt in your diet. You end up drinking more water. It balances itself out. Eventually, that water weight will come off. But for me, I had no ability to do that. I was, for some reason, like a camel. Every little bit of water I was taking in, I was just holding on to it. And that was plummeting my sodium levels. And this led to loads of different symptoms in terms of just feeling, basically, I felt kind of brain dead a lot of the time. I felt very foggy. If anyone, and actually, I know, Charles, you've done kind of long, prolonged diets. And that kind of brain fog that you've consistently got, where you just kind of feel like half there, and you're just like relying on caffeine and things like this. I felt like that all the time. I couldn't concentrate. It was really, really difficult. And because this was in my second year at university, it made studying for my exams for my final year incredibly difficult, because I was just like half there the entire time. And with that in mind, and the fact that I was on medication and on a water restricted diet, I was on 250 mils of water a day, which is like a small glass of water. It's no joke. You're probably down like a liter in the morning without even blinking an eye, and I
Yeah.
do now. And so it was really restrictive. I couldn't go out and socialize very easily. And I was already quite a unsocial person, always kind of a bit of a shy person. And this put me massively into my shell. So in that final year, it was all about getting through, and just getting my degree. And I got it. And I came out and I went into like office jobs, still at this time, not fully recovered. And there was in this time when I was coming into office jobs and things like this, where I was more so discovering bodybuilding, where I was like, what can I do? I don't want to play kind of football anymore. Like I just don't feel confident to do that with other people. I no longer wanted to run anymore. I like this weightlifting thing. Maybe I can give it a bit more of a go, research it a little bit more. Initially finding kind of the wrong things to be doing. So I kind of did what I call a folk, or I think actually Alan Aragon termed it. So it's like a fat bulk, basically.
Yeah.
I just pounded back the food. At the time, it was like quote unquote a clean bulk, because I was eating all like just ridiculously clean foods, as it were, like nothing processed, no desserts. I literally thought if I ate like chocolate, I'd put on fat. At that moment, literally, I was orthorexic for sure. My family were actually worried about me at one point. So I had this poor relationship with food, but I did pound on a lot of muscle plus a lot of fat. And then I kind of did, I think it was called a warrior diet at the time. And I kind of followed keto and things like this. And I shredded off a lot of the kind of fat that I gained. And during this time, I just wasn't really enjoying it that much, but I was kind of getting into it. I was discovering things about my body, things I could do, and controlling it, which was a big thing for me. I'd been so out of control of my body with the accident and everything that I was kind of like lost. And so by kind of dialing in my nutrition, training hard, being consistent, it was amazing to see that the body could change in a positive way. So after a while, I kind of started doing more research, trying to figure out this thing a little bit better. Started coming across Lyle McDonald, bodyrecomposition.com, fantastic resource. Read literally every article on there on my commutes to work. This is where I found bodybuilding.com, I think it was, and Alan Aragon was over there spouting off amazing stuff about if it fits your macros and flexible dieting. And I was like, oh my gosh, this can't be right. Surely. I actually disliked Alan at the start. I was just like, this man's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's all about clean eating. But eventually I kind of opened my mind and took this knowledge in. And then I started stumbling across Matt Ogus over on YouTube, who was doing a tremendous job at sharing knowledge from Eric Helms and then 3DMJ. And I was like, wow, this natural bodybuilding thing, look at Matt Ogus. Like, he's in incredible shape. Could I do that if I'm like consistent with what I'm doing? And eventually I got to a point where I was so invested in kind of this fitness lifestyle, and I decided to do a personal training qualification on the weekends, and I became qualified. And then I was like, screw it. I live at home. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to become a one-on-one PT, which I did at my local gym. And I also simultaneously started my first contest prep in 2014. So I started dieting for that, getting pretty damn lean. People in the gym were seeing I was getting results. We have quite a lot of local schools that go to this gym. So younger guys were like, oh, I want some of what you're doing. How do you know what you're doing? And so I ended up programming for some of these guys kind of via online and charging very, very little. And at this point, I was kind of like, oh, I want to start documenting my progress. I started kind of doing some blog articles. And I started doing some YouTube. If you look back at Revive Stronger, I've still got, I don't know if you've ever looked at those
I
awful
saw them.
videos, Charles. Yeah, there's some
I
really
love
old,
that.
awful videos.
I love that young Steve. Like you had a video, like one day, a full day of eating or something
Yeah.
like that after the show. Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
entertaining.
there's some of the old ones while posing and everything. I leave them there because it tells a story, and I
Mm,
think it gives maybe someone like yourself, Charles, like you look back at that and you can laugh at me, and you're like, oh, maybe what I'm doing isn't so silly, and
yeah.
it's absolutely not. And I'd hope no one thinks that, but it tells a story. So this is where I started developing my brand, and I first came up with Revive with Stephen Hall. And I felt like that wasn't strong enough, and also didn't tell a story and didn't make people think, oh, that's kind of like fitness, health, that's bodybuilding. So then I came up with Revive Stronger. And if I haven't kind of told the story already, it's all about kind of coming from a point of which I was in the worst shape of my life, the worst health of my life. I was literally on the edge of potentially kind of like not being in a good way. I could have taken the illness and really, really become depressed and really not done much with my life. Whereas I took bodybuilding to build myself up, and I essentially revived stronger. I took my body to stage. I got shredded glutes. I did fine my first time competing. I didn't do particularly well, but I managed to do it, and that was the whole reason. That was my why. I wanted to prove to myself I was fully recovered from my accident and that I could do this. And once I'd done that with myself, it gave me so much confidence and
Mm,
so much drive to do that with other people who feel lost in their kind of fitness journey and who want to build muscle, gain kind of lose fat. And a lot of the guys in my local gym were reaching towards like anabolics and things like this. And I was like, there's no reason you need to do that. You haven't even like, they weren't even been training for that long, and they were kind of taking every supplement under the sun. And I was like, there's just a grounding of education that needs to be there.
yeah.
So this is where kind of Revive Stronger came from. And it's grown huge since then, which I'm just super happy about.
Yes. Yes. Well said. It's funny you mentioned the warrior diet at the beginning, like by Ori Hofmeckler. I also followed the warrior diet a couple of months. I guess it was like 2010 or something like that, or 2012. And that's the reason why I appreciate Revive Stronger even more, because right now we have a lot of scientific based stuff online. But back in the days, you had like bodybuilding forums or like these pseudo scientific books, like it's like crazy to think about.
Yeah, I have some of my old books. I think I have like the blood type diet.
Yeah.
And I have, there was one that was similar to the warrior diet, but it wasn't quite the warrior diet.
What
Oh
was
no,
the
I think it was a paleo diet was another one that I have a book of.
something like that, right? Or the what was it called? I have it on my Google Drive as well. Like this, it's like a sort of intermittent fasting, like the warrior diet. I need to check the.
I have a booklet on like intermittent fasting made by like the most random guy. It's like this little
Yeah,
booklet that's like, I don't even know who buys this book. I don't know how I found it or came across it. And it's just madness.
yeah, right. I like the old books. Jason Perugia, I want to say. The
Oh
book from
yeah.
back. The same way. Yeah. It's also like John Kiefer from back in the day.
Oh yeah, I remember John Keep. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, that's a topic for another podcast. So yeah, what I want to talk about today as well is I want to talk about like how to do a proper gaining phase, because that's also a reason why I wanted to have you as my coach, because I coach myself. My niche are entrepreneurs that want to lose weight and want to get in shape, but I also coach myself and me. I'm also into like gaining the most amount of muscle possible to have an amazing physique in a couple of years from now, to have the best physique I can reach genetically. And to have that, you need to go through a long and proper gaining phase. And the reason why I wanted to get coached is, as a coach, you think, or you mostly have all the knowledge you need, but then applying the knowledge and just following it through and be committed, that's also one big problem. What I see for me and for a lot of other guys is I struggle with being comfortable to gain weight for a long period of time and to have a structured and efficient training by doing that. So it would be cool if you could share like your approach, how to design a proper gaining phase, because you're doing this with me right now. And I just realized how valuable it is to have a coach besides you that basically tells you, hey, dude, you're not getting fat. Just go on, follow through. We have the perfect plan and just go for it. So we're cool if you could share what you do with your clients.
100%. I think I've been through them all. So I've done the fat bulk and I've gone way too quick, way too quick. I was gaining like if I wasn't gaining half a stone, like 7 pounds in a week, I was not happy about that. Like literally not joking. I was like, I
Seven
need to eat even more.
like three kilograms a week.
Came out of hospital 135 pounds, and within a year I was up at 190. So yeah, big rebound out of hospital. And you can imagine I was, had the hamster cheeks and everything. So
Yeah.
you have that extreme, the kind of dirty bulk that a lot of people talk about, where you do gain muscle and you gain all the muscle potentially you could, but you gain an kind of ridiculous amount of unwanted fat that's just not necessary. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you have maybe body recomposition or gaintaining, some people might call it, which can work. We certainly don't need to be in a surplus to gain muscle. That's been shown. However, for more advanced trainees, for intermediate guys, you're certainly actually, even as novice trainees, if you're not in a surplus, you're certainly slowing down the muscle growth you can gain. And so you have this kind of middle ground, this sweet spot, which I would term methodical massing, where you're gaining sufficiently to see scale weight increase, but you're not gaining at such a pace where you're gaining unwanted and unnecessary amounts of fat. You're almost maximizing all the muscle growth you could potentially be gaining, whilst minimizing kind of fat as much as you can. So this is the middle ground, and I call that kind of 0.5 to 1% of weight gain every 2 weeks. So that's kind of 1 to 2% every month. I think for most people, that seems to suit really, really well. Because like I said, it's much more dependable. It's much more known that you're going to gain muscle at this kind of level of surplus. And the surplus brings with it the ability to do more work in the gym. Volume, as many know, volume is a key driver of hypertrophy, so long as you're recovering from it and you've got sufficient intensity. And again, carbohydrates, again, in a surplus, more calories, that's going to fuel recovery. So you're really, really helping yourself to gain a lot of muscle by doing those things. So that's kind of my approach. And yeah, I don't know if there's more specific questions you've got. I could probably dive into a load of side tangents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially also like the macro ranges you recommend. This will be also interesting.
Cool. So I think as a rule of thumb, or actually, I think a lot of people end up using like percentages and things like this, which aren't very appropriate for people in general, because protein and fat and their requirements for someone are set by your body mass. The body requires a certain amount of fat, a certain amount of protein for muscle growth and for health and everything like that. Whereas carbohydrates can be viewed as just like what's left. It's kind of the energy for what you're doing day to day. It's non-essential, but it will be essential for maximal muscle growth, maximal performance, and things like this. So that's important to take into consideration. So then when we're setting these things, protein, as a rule of thumb, I like at 1 gram per pound. You can argue you could go less than this, 0.8 grams per pound and up to 1.2 grams per pound. I'm happy for people to go by preference on that. I generally like people to go a little bit on the higher side, just because I'm a bit of a bro and the bodybuilder in me, and people just enjoy that, especially if they take a higher carbohydrate approach, because that brings with it a lot of tag along lower quality protein sources. And we don't need to go into the whole, I guess, kind of recommendations for like vegan people, because obviously that makes a bit of difference in terms of quality of protein. It's something you could create a whole podcast on that. You may well be doing one. So then in terms of fat recommendations, I see these as 0.3 per pound as kind of the lower amount I like to see people at. And then they can go as high as they want, so long as they're getting sufficient protein and then carbohydrates. But I think there are some benefits to keeping fats kind of to the lower end. So 0.3 per pound is a good idea, and maybe going up to 0.6 and give you that kind of range and freedom. So 0.3 grams per pound up to 0.6 grams per pound, and then let the rest of your calories come from carbohydrates. And this is, again, because these are going to be what are fueling performance. This is what's going to be fueling recovery. These are also highly insulinogenic. And so we know jacked bodybuilders, the guys who are the biggest, they end up injecting this sort of thing. So obviously, if we can have more insulin, it's probably a good idea from an anabolic standpoint. And that kind of stems from Broderick Chavez, and old school bodybuilding generally has always been slightly on the high carb approach. And I've just seen that to be really beneficial for my clients. I don't think it's a game changer. I think so long as you've got protein and you've got the calorie surplus leading to the 0.5 to 1% weight gain every single 2 weeks, there or thereabouts, you're in a really good spot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. I also want to talk about like meal frequency, because then you have like the macros. And some guys take it to one extreme and they think like, yeah, meal frequency doesn't matter at all. So I'm gonna do like an intermittent fasting approach where I just eat like 1 or 2 meals a day. And I know you're not a big fan of that. So yeah, what's like your recommendation regarding the frequency of meals?
Cool. So yeah, I guess we have kind of we've kind of prioritized things. We've got calorie balance there in terms of being in a surplus. Then we've got macros, which come next in kind of priorities. And then we have, like you say, nutrient timing is probably a next thing that is of importance for growing muscle. And what we find is the body has stores of fat, as we know, it's right on our body. You can see it there. And we also have stores of glycogen. We have that stored in muscles, liver, all of this sort of thing. So the thing the body doesn't have kind of readily available stores of is amino acids, apart from like the protein that is our muscle. We don't really want to be breaking down our own muscle tissue. That kind of defeats the whole kind of game of trying to build muscle. So this is why it's quite important to spread your protein through the day. So anywhere from the literature's found anywhere from 3 up to maybe 6, 7, splitting your protein intake across those meals fairly evenly seems to allow people to gain the most muscle. And this is all to do with muscle protein synthesis, which is basically muscle growth, versus muscle protein breakdown, which is kind of muscle loss. So we're trying to maximize our muscle protein synthesis, and that seems to be best done through having our protein split between the 3 to 7 or 3 to 6 meals per day. That seems to be a really good recommendation. Consuming those every 3 to 5 hours, that seems to be what the literature is kind of pushing us towards. A lot of people then question, oh, should we be kind of waking up in the middle of the night to get protein in? And I think that's crazy because sleep, and as we're finding out, sleep is so important. It's just something we don't want to have to set an alarm to eat some protein. And I've done it before and it's not fun. I've had it where I've kind of left some Greek yogurt by the side of my bed and kind of eat that in the middle of the night. It doesn't promote good sleep at all. It's really not fun.
Yeah.
So I don't recommend people do that. But what they can do is they can front end and they can back end their day and then spread the rest through the day. And I recommend at the end of the day, potentially making this a bigger bolus or having some fat with this or making it a casein based source, because then that at least slows down the digestion. So you've got more amino acids kind of drip feeding your body, as it were, through the night. This makes theoretical sense. There's not strong evidence to support it, however.
So if somebody really wants to maximize all his gains that he can possibly maximize, you would recommend like potentially like something like casein or some other protein source before sleep, right?
Yeah, I think kind of a casein powder or cottage cheese or Greek yogurt, all of those, they're pretty good.
So in your opinion, like if you would do a 16-8 intermittent fasting approach, it wouldn't be the best if you really want to maximize every percentage you can get out.
Absolutely. There's no question in which it would work, but there's still no question that it's not optimal.
Yeah, it's interesting because since I'm getting coached by you, I also like changed things up a little bit. I was like the intermittent fasting guy back in the days. And right now I realize, okay, if I just do like the 16-8 approach, on one side, it's super hard to get my calories in. And on the other side, I can just get in like 2 or 3 protein feedings. So what I did is I started to drink just a whey isolate, like after waking up before the gym. And then when my real eating window started, I started to get my meals in to have like the best of both worlds. Because I believe intermittent fasting is also not really a black and white thing. You still get some benefits there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can even, oftentimes when I have clients who want to do the intermittent fasting because they find it to preference or they find it allows them to adhere to their diet potentially better, but they want to maximize kind of muscle protein synthesis, I suggest doing like a protein modified intermittent fast where they do something like whey protein or they have whey isolate, which can work really, really well.
That's a good point, because nowadays on the internet you see a lot of people talking about, yeah, intermittent fasting is the best approach for like gaining muscle mass. And in my opinion as well, like if you really want to maximize everything, if you're really in a proper gaining phase, I would try to get at least 4 protein feedings in like as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where it's kind of like people will say, what's your opinion on kind of calories, a calorie deficit? Is that really just all it means for fat loss, or is there hormones? What do you think? And I'm like, I don't have an opinion on that. It's fact. If you're in a calorie deficit, you're losing weight. Now, is it as simple as that? Are hormones involved? 100%. But if you're in a calorie deficit, you're losing weight. And likewise, if you're not having kind of the protein spread through the day, we know now that's not optimizing your muscle growth.
Yeah. Totally. So what I want to talk about as well is because I struggled with that. That's the biggest thing I struggle with when it comes to like gaining proper weight or like muscle mass. Because I can eat a lot of calories if I really want to and if I need to. But the problem I have is a little bit with my body composition. Like as soon as I see that I gain a little bit of fat, like most other guys, that especially I see it with guys that know the research, like pretty smart, they basically hold themselves back by not pushing through that mental barrier. So what I would like to know is, what do you do with clients or with guys, especially also girls, that are kind of afraid to gain fat in their gaining phase?
Brilliant. Yeah, it's such a thing, and it held me back for quite a while. Where I think a lot of us get into the mindset of maybe thinking we're advanced, or maybe looking at muscle growth in natural trainees and thinking, man, the most I can gain in a month is a pound. If I gain any more than that, it's all fat. And I think a lot of us try and approach our gaining phases like at the rate limiting number of muscle growth, which I think is not the right thing to do. Like
Mm,
in a gaining phase, we should allow for a little bit of surplus. We should allow for a little bit of fat gain and to get softer. It's unrealistic that everything we put into our body surplus wise is going to result in new muscle tissue. Otherwise, we would see our body fat coming down and we'd see muscle like just gaining. I mean, that would be amazing. If we could continue to grow muscle and lose fat, then sure. The way I try and describe it to clients is it's kind of like the fat you gain during a gaining phase is the cost of doing business. Just like when you're in a fat loss phase, the cost of doing business is feeling tired and lethargic and your
mm.
performance goes down. The grass is always greener. We always think, oh, I want to be
That's so true.
dieting when I'm in a massing phase. I want to be cutting. I want to be massing when I'm in a dieting phase. It just always happens. So it came to such a thing. I actually did a presentation one year when Mike Israel came over. I did a presentation on Adipose Phobia, and I did an article on Adipose Phobia, which I made up. It's not a real term. Basically, adipose is fat, and phobia is obviously.
Sounds good though.
Yeah,
Sounds
it does
scientific.
sound good. It sounds legit. I think some people think it's a real term. It needs to get in the dictionary, and
Totally,
I'll be the creator of that.
totally.
So this is all to do with people holding themselves back because they're just afraid to gain that fat. And what I think is a great reminder is a lot of the people that are afraid to gain it, or at least a lot of the people I've worked with, have always been traditionally kind of skinny anyway. And they kind of go through fat loss phases and they lose fat really easily. So it's kind of like just knowing that within a week, you could lose all the fat, like a lot of fat. I mean, not all the fat, but within a month, you could lose a hell of a lot of the fat. And within 2 months, you could be a completely new lean individual. You could have lost kind of 5% body fat potentially within 2 months.
Yeah,
So the fact is, you're not gaining that amount of fat over 2 months. You're gaining that over maybe like consecutive ages. You could be massing for a long, long time before you gain that.
yeah,
So it's just understanding that on one side, we've got all the pros of being in a surplus. And then on the other side, we've got the cons. The pros will always outweigh the cons, because if you truly want to maximize your results, you truly want to gain the muscle that you want to gain as an advanced trainee or getting towards intermediate to advanced, then you need to be in that surplus, and you need to accept that your physique that you perform your best at, that you have the best training, the best recovery, is not the physique that you necessarily like the look of the best. And then that's where you have to start focusing less on your physique and more on your performance and more on PRs and these sort of things, because I always say training lights the fire and the fuel is the nutrition. So you need to be training hard. And then as long as you've got the nutrition to support it, then you're going to see a blazing fire and a ton of muscle growth. So yeah, it's just about kind of slowly developing that mindset within an individual and talking someone through it. And oftentimes people who come to me for coaching have that kind of insecurity, and they've seen it in me and they've seen I've pushed through it. So they kind of are like, oh, Steve's the guy I trust to be able to help me with this.
yeah.
So yeah, it kind of works itself out.
Yeah, very good point. It's funny. I remember when you started coaching in December, you gave me the calories I need, and then I asked you, yeah, Steve, can I have like a deficit day on like every Sunday, because I feel uncomfortable eating so much, and now I eat like I guess around 300 calories more on a daily basis, and I don't care about having a deficit day. Like now remembering back, I'm like, what did I think, man? I was like another person. Like, what's up with this guy, you know? And I even remember also like some months ago, 1.5 months, I started to kind of or I tried to have my steps like on a 10,000 steps a day on like a weekly basis, just to keep the calorie surplus the same, like 10,000 steps. And I was kind of stressing myself out a little bit. Sometimes I had a day with 2,000 steps. So I was like, oh no, I need to go out and do some steps. And now I couldn't care less if I do like 2,000 steps or 10,000. I'm like, okay, these are my calories. I just eat them. And it's just interesting how your mindset can change during like months if you do it right.
Absolutely. And this is something, and I'm glad you brought it up, because for some people, it just takes time. I, over time, have got more and more comfortable with it. And I always say experience cures anxiety. So the more you do something, every single time you then try doing it, the easier it's going to be, because you know what to expect. You know it's not the end of the world if the scale goes up a few pounds one day, because you know after a few days it's going to come back down and you're going to be where you want to be. And I'm glad you brought up also the fact that you had stressors, and kind of having meticulous, like tracking your steps and having the deficit days, and they're kind of causing you some stress. That's not promoting muscle growth either. And I think being relaxed in an off season and being relaxed in a gaining phase and not being so obsessed with all the minutia that isn't even required or helpful is actually undervalued. Being in a really low stress state, again, promotes recovery, promotes muscle growth, all the things that we really, really want.
Yes, yes. Good point. Good point. I see it a lot, especially like, I guess all these guys have the same personality profile. I also worked with some clients that were like really smart guys. They had some proper knowledge in like nutrition and training, but they were kind of self-sabotaging themselves exactly because of that kind of mindset. So I'm glad that you were able to push it out of me like step by step. That's super important.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with tons of guys like that, and even some girls, and some of them aren't open-minded enough to let it go, and they hold themselves back continually. So yeah, it's sad to see, because they kind of put it so much effort in. And I say this with the surplus thing and the adipose phobia. You're doing all the hard work with your training, yet, and you're trying to light the match, but you can't fuel the fire because you're not in the surplus. You're doing all the hard work and you're not benefiting from it because you're not in that surplus, or not benefiting maximally, at least.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I just remember it now. A couple of days ago, wasn't. I mean, I'm not really hungry on a daily basis, but a couple of days ago, I wasn't motivated really to eat, but I just had you in the back of my head. I was like, oh shit, dude! Like I'm committed to get coached by Steve. I need to make Steve proud, and I was just eating because I knew, okay, it's not just me that is committed to that process. It's also Steve. So it's also interesting. Like as soon as you have a coach, you tap into another kind of motivation. So I really appreciate it.
No, yeah, definitely. The adherence, the accountability factor is huge. And no doubt you've had that with your clients as well, where literally some people know exactly what they need to do. They just need like a figure above to be like, do it. Like they need someone to check in with and tell them that, like, yeah, you need to consistently do this. And that's a huge thing. Consistently eating in a surplus for long, extended periods of time, muscle growth is slow. So if you need someone to, like, yeah, pick you up on it every week, you need someone to keep you accountable, then a coach can help massively with that.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff. So what I also want to talk about in this podcast here is what you did also with my training, because when I coached myself, I wasn't really like periodizing like that. I had a deload every 6th week, but I was never really periodizing in terms of like reps in reserve, and also like with like the increasing the sets was not a real thing for me. So it would be cool if you could go over that briefly with what you did with my training.
Absolutely. So I guess I'll start off with volume landmarks. So this is a concept that was popularized, or at least actually founded by Mike Israetel, James Hoffman, and Chad Wesley Smith in the Scientific Principles of Strength Training. This was the first place that I came across it, and it was like, whoa, mind blowing. Like, you can actually increase the number of sets you're doing. Whenever I trained, the progression schemes were always increasing reps, increasing load.
Yes.
But from the concept of kind of hypertrophy, the biggest kind of influencer in the short term is the amount of volume you're doing. What's the best way, or the biggest way you can increase volume? Adding a set. That's a huge amount more volume if we're talking volume load or even number of hard sets. I generally typically talk about number of hard sets as the way I talk about volume for hypertrophy. So that's number of hard sets within maybe 5 to 30 repetitions, and that's with an intensity of at least maybe 4 reps in reserve, all the way up to failure. that's the number of sets we're doing, and that's kind of how I designate volume. And so the volume landmarks talk about MEV, MAV, and MRV. So MEV is minimum effective volume. So that's the least volume you need to grow. So that's the least you can get away with and still see some sort of muscle growth. Then as we move through, we have maximal adaptive volume. This is the most volume you can do and adapt from. This is actually where you're growing the most muscle. This is actually something that is adaptive, as it says. So once was your MAV is now actually higher because the body is adapting to it. This is what all biological systems do. You present a stress, it responds, it adapts, and you need to present more and more stress so it can respond and adapt. And then we get to a point of MRV. So this is maximal recoverable volume. This is the most volume we can do and recover from. So if you did 3x10 squats last week, you do 3x10 squats again this week at the same load, and that's all you could do. That's maximal recoverable volume. And then typically you follow that with a deload. You may overshoot your MRV. It depends on kind of how advanced you are and how hard you want to push. And then you would go into a deload period. This is that kind of maintenance volume, just an amount of volume where you can not provide stress. You're focusing on recovery so that you can then recycle back to minimum effective volume. And so the way I move through that with clients is starting out with lower sets and then adding sets through the week, depending on how their performance is going, how their recovery is going. And that typically lasts from maybe 4 weeks up to maybe 8 weeks if they're kind of a female who's maybe a little bit weaker, or just a weaker male who's more novice. They can go for a bit longer. They adapt a bit quicker, and they don't create so much fatigue, whereas someone much more advanced, potentially in a dieting phase, they accumulate fatigue much faster. So the window between MEV to MRV is much shorter, so they need to deload more frequently. And the other thing that I do there, and the thing you talked about, was reps in reserve. So this was a concept I first came across, RPE, and that's a rate of perceived exertion. So this was a scale of kind of 0 all the way up to 10. 10 out of 10 being like all out effort. You couldn't do any more. A 9 would be 1 rep left in the tank, 8, 2 reps left in the tank. And so then I moved towards reps in reserve because it was just more of an intuitive system. So if you're a 4 RAR, that's 4 left before failure, 3, 2, 1. And then 0 would be, you could do no more good reps. If you were to try to do another rep, you would have like absolutely broke down your form. You would have potentially injured yourself. It would have been a calamity, awful. So the way I use that is we have a knowledge of, okay, so we've got our minimum effective volume. What's our minimum effective relative intensity? It seems to be maybe all the way down to 5 reps in reserve, but that seems a bit hard for people to actually quantify in their head, like what's 5 reps in reserve? That's pretty far away from failure. So I tend to start people around 3, 4 reps in reserve. This is where cadence of the bar, maybe if you're bench pressing, slows down. It's where it starts to get hard and like it's tough. Like if you go to a 3 to 4 reps in reserve squat, that's not an easy squat. Like it's still hard training. A lot of people, if they think it's easy training, I'd probably say you're not training at that reps in reserve, or you're mental and have to train at super hard levels, which some people do. So then you move, that's your minimum effective in relative intensity. So I move from those 3 to 4, and then each week I'm basically like, right, we're going to add volume where you're recovered, and then we're going to add, I want you to add a bit of intensity or a repetition here or there. And through the weeks, each week you do that, you progressively overload, you get harder and harder. You'll probably find your reps in reserve drop by about 1 every single week to allow this overload to happen. So then you eventually move towards 1 to 0 reps in reserve, depending on the movement, the exercise, how kind of advanced the person is. And then you deload at a reps in reserve that's super duper easy, not even 5. And then you repeat and go back to minimum effective volume. So I found this structured approach, it's not only like logical, it's not only scientifically based, it is anecdotally the best way to train, I found, with my clients and for myself. It's just provided really, really known and obvious results. And you never really go into a session and have a bad workout. The hardest thing is actually the earlier weeks. You probably would agree, Charles, where you hold back. Training to failure is not something that we shy away from. I love training to failure. It's kind of, that's what initially got me into training and why I love training. But there was a period of time where if I kept training to failure, I couldn't achieve sufficient volume. I'd get really, really fatigued, and therefore I wouldn't grow. And I started actually regressing because my fatigue would just outweigh the fitness that I was producing, and my actual performance would then just be way, way down.
Even when you deloaded during that time?
I probably wouldn't even deload in that
Uh,
time, to be quite honest. It was probably a forced deload as my performance just started plummeting. I was just
yeah,
like, I can't even lift anything now.
right. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. You also mentioned that I would agree with this because I remember when I came out of my cutting phase after my photo shoot and we started to work together. I remember the first 2 weeks, I was like, dude, I really had to hold myself back. I was like, yeah, but I'm in a calorie surplus. I need to train harder, otherwise I'm getting fat. I remember that I was like, dude, how should I know if I still have like 4 or 3 reps in reserve? Now, after a couple of mesocycles, it's getting better. But in the beginning, I really struggled with holding myself back. Like you're so right.
Yeah, it's similar to I gave an analogy the other day on my Instagram. It's like when you stumble upon a good documentary, a good series, sorry, on Netflix, and you're just like, oh my God, I want to watch and binge watch every single episode in one day. And the next day you're going to regret that because you don't have anything to watch. You don't have anything to watch in the future weeks. So what this style of training is doing is providing an overload today, and it's allowing for future overloads, which is very important. Overload is a two-part thing. Overload here and now to provide a stimulus for muscle growth, but also allowing for future overloads. Because if we don't get that second part, where are we going? We're not progressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. When I look back how I trained before I worked with you, I was like the biggest bro. I still deloaded, but how I train now is like so much more enjoyable because during the first weeks I still made gains, but after the gym I'm not like beaten up. Like today, okay, this is like today it was like the first training of my fifth week of my last week. I had to take a nap after the gym. I was totally wrecked, but otherwise it's so enjoyable, man. Like I mean, even being like KO after gym is also enjoyable. But if you're already like wrecked in the first couple of weeks of your training cycle, you're clearly doing something wrong.
Yeah, I think that's what ended up happening with me was a combination of not being able to provide sufficient volume because I was training too hard all the time. So I wouldn't see growth. And then I'd have to be deloading so soon because I'd have nowhere to go. I'd miss out the second part of kind of overload, the progression and the progressive overload. So no, that's definitely true.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just curious, how long should like one of these gaining phases be? Like, what's the minimum amount, and what's like the maximum amount in your opinion?
Cool. So I like to see, as a general rule of thumb, I'm 3 to 4 months or 3 to 6 months, maybe. Or you could term that like 15 to 20 weeks. That's how long I generally like a massing phase to be. That seems to see a good amount of weight to be gained, especially when you're methodical massing. You're not spinning your wheels for ages trying to gain tone, and you're not overshooting and like bulking and getting really fat in that time. So you can gain a significant amount of muscle in that time. You potentially get a little bit soft in that time where it becomes appropriate to either enter something like a mini cut or go through a primer phase or a low volume maintenance phase before then going through a longer dieting phase. So that's where most people land. Now, if you're more new to the gym, you can probably end up doing it for longer because you actually grow muscle so fast that you actually don't accumulate body fat as quickly.
Mm-hmm.
If you're more advanced, potentially it needs to be a bit on the kind of the shorter end, especially if you're a competitor and you're competing soon. Potentially it needs to be a bit shorter. The shortest I'd ever like to see a massing phase is probably 10 weeks. Anything less than that, I'm kind of like, maybe if you're just like in a really unique situation where you're just using it to like recover from a diet or something like that. Otherwise, it's just not enough time to really get the kind of muscle machinery working. So you've actually grown and accumulated a decent hit of tissue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, like after the 15 to 20 weeks you mentioned, you do like a mini cut or do you do like a primer phase? Like what do you exactly do after these weeks?
Cool. So it depends. The point here is you've got to a point where you've escalated your volume for such a long period of time. You have seen quite a buildup of adaptive resistance. So every single biological system has this kind of adaptive resistance. So you may well be trying to lose fat, and we all see this. You kind of see a buildup of diet fatigue. Your weight slows. You get hungrier and hungrier. You're really, really not very energetic. And so you see that adaptive resistance build up. Within training and high volume training, we see the same thing. We don't get pumps as well. We potentially find we're getting a bit beat up in our joints. We don't get sore anymore. We just kind of feel like we're going through the motions with our training. We also get psychologically fatigued. And we've used every kind of hypertrophic tool in our toolkit. We're using potentially metabolite work. We're using high repetition ranges. We can't overload volume anymore. So we need to cycle it back down. And this is being seen more in the literature. And James Krieger's doing some cool experiments with his kind of cyclical volumes. And so this is where a primer phase could come in. So if the person is still lean or they don't do well with aggressive diets, a primer phase might be appropriate. So this is a low volume period of time where we do allow to train at maintenance volumes. So we allow for a lot of the adaptive resistance that's kind of accumulated from the high volume of training to really kind of come down. Something that happens with high volume training is we see our muscle fiber types transition more towards slow twitch. Slow twitch fibers are not the ones that hypertrophy the best. So when we go through a low volume, higher intensity period of time, we see a transition more towards faster twitch muscle fibers, which sets us up for growth. So when people come out of these lower volume periods, their minimum effective volume comes down. So they need less volume to grow. And they come into this next period and they're like, oh my gosh, the pumps are huge. I'm doing barely any volume and I'm getting sore. And it's like, yep, this is now you've set yourself up for many, many months more high volume training. Now, a mini cut is somewhat similar. You can't get away with such low volume. You can't do maintenance volume during a mini cut. So it can resensitize you a little bit to training volume, and resensitize is just the term for kind of allowing the adaptive resistance to subdue and set you up for success coming out. So you can probably get away with a mini cut kind of once or twice before you need to enter an actual primer phase. So the mini cut is a 3 to 6 week aggressive diet where you're training at lower volumes, maybe minimum effective volume, and not pushing up any higher and sustaining that. So you still kind of accumulate fatigue through that training. So it's not quite as good as a primer phase in that kind of sense, but you have the benefit of ridding yourself of some fat. So you can lose quite a lot of fat in that phase. So you might be looking to average a 1% body weight loss per week, which could be 1 to 2 pounds for a lot of people. And after 6 weeks, that's a ton of weight if you go for 6 weeks. The problem with it is you can't just keep cycling massing phases, mini cuts, massing phases, mini cuts, because you are accumulating that fatigue, and that adaptive resistance will get you at some point.
That's super interesting because like last year I thought you need to exactly do that, like gaining phase and then mini cut, gaining phase and then mini cut. But what you say right now makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's something I've done myself. So I have run, I think 3 mini cuts in my off season so far. And I essentially realized this third mini cut was inappropriate. I actually shouldn't have run one of my earlier ones. I was lean enough not to require a mini cut. I could have gone for a short maintenance phase, primer phase, and come out and started massing again. I wish I'd done that. I think after 2 mini cuts, you're in a position where the fatigue is just really, really high, and the risk of injury is getting pretty high from overuse injuries. And you'll probably find your training responsiveness is just coming down. All the biofeedback you're getting from pump soreness and training responsiveness is just coming down, and the amount of volume you need to actually get a pump probably becomes quite unsustainable. So I'm doing some writing on primer phases now, and it's really, really convincing me of the huge amount of value that these provide.
Yeah. It's interesting because I would have guessed if you do a mini cut and then you go into a gaining phase again, that you will recover anyway from the fatigue, at least in the next deload during your gaining phase.
Yeah, it's because of the fact that when we think about the training volumes, maintenance volume is basically not very, like it's basically almost non-fatigue producing, whereas minimum effective volume is an overload for muscle growth. And so it is by default creating fatigue. So the training during a mini cut is creating fatigue, and it is kind of making adaptive resistance build up. And in addition to that, you're in a diet which is fatiguing in itself. So you're not getting the benefit of being at maintenance calories. So in fact, it's not quite resensitizing you to the state that a primer phase would. And therefore, it's probably not the best solution to keep running them. And you may well risk muscle loss if you keep doing that for a long period of time.
Yeah. Would it also make sense then to do a primer, like to do a gaining phase, then a primer phase, and then after primer phase, a mini cut?
I think a standard cut would be fine. You could probably do a standard cut and it could end up being mini. I think that's fine. But yeah, it's just terminology at that point. I think that would be fine.
Okay, interesting. Awesome stuff. I learned so much in this podcast so far. Like,
awesome.
Good. The last topic I want to touch on in this podcast is something we talked about privately, is the sleep. and optimizing recovery, because I'm also diving into it right now. I use as well some supplements like ashwagandha, schisandra, all these adaptogenic herbs, L-theanine. I guess I almost took an overdose of L-theanine before that podcast. I was like super chill. I had to take a nap. So I still don't know if it was the fact I took L-theanine and magnesium together that like made me sleep after the gym, or perhaps the workout was too intense. But it made me think like, okay, we also need to talk about that today. So what is your number one advice, or what's like your routine for good sleep and good recovery?
Cool. Yeah, I think taking you through my day is actually a great solution, or not solution, a great way to kind of answer the question. So what I do is in the morning, I have a SAD light, so seasonal affective disorder light,
I have
which
it
you,
here even.
yeah, you're shining it.
Yeah,
Oh no, you haven't got it
to
on. Good.
install
It's
it.
too late to have that on.
Yeah, pretty late.
So mine provides 10,000 lux, and lights indoors, you're lucky if they produce like hundreds of lux. So this is powerful. And what this is doing is basically simulating similar to the outside. Now, sunlight outside is way more powerful than 10,000 lux, but I don't go outside. Ideally, I would get outside for half an hour to an hour and get some decent sunlight before midday. With my schedule, it's just not possible. I work indoors. So I have this light, and that's what I use first thing in the morning. I then also cap my caffeine. I try and cap it 9 hours before bed. That's really quite difficult because that means capping it at like 1 o'clock, which is like fairly early. I guess I should be able to actually do that. But yeah, I try and cap it at 9 hours if I can.
Yeah, same
And
here.
then I do also get out in the day. So I think being active is a great thing. All your listeners will be people who exercise. That's going to be helping. So obviously doing that. Then through my day, I'm just trying to match kind of light rhythms. So at this sort of time, kind of from about 6 after my workout, I put on these clear blue light blockers. So that's what these are. They aren't, I don't need glasses, although I did used to need glasses, so I could have that excuse. And then about 2 hours before bed, I put on my amber blue light blocking glasses. So these help block out blue light as per what they're called. And by doing that, we're allowing secretion of melatonin to be naturally coming out. Blue light blocks this, and melatonin is something that helps us get to sleep. So you can supplement with that, but I would recommend just using the glasses. It's going to be cheaper. It's a bit more kind of, I don't know, hippie, more, it's less kind of like you're not taking a supplement. So people like that. So that's why I generally recommend. And also just dimming lights. So rather than just having all your lights blazing, or with your phone, most of them have like a blue light blocking kind of system within them, or you can download like Flux. I've had that downloaded on my laptop for like ages. I've also been using blue light blockers for ages. Also within that kind of 2 hour window when I'm going down towards bed, I'm kind of chilling out. Kind of want to put the blue light blockers on. That's like, okay, Netflix and chill, quite literally watching Netflix and kind of chilling out. Something I would recommend people don't do is watch something stressful before bed.
Game of Thrones, thousands of people getting killed.
Yeah, I really enjoy. Me and Charlotte have been watching Line of Duty, and last night I literally had a nightmare about it because I was like, this isn't good. I shouldn't be watching this stressful stuff. So maybe like the last thing you watch before bed, like try and make it something chill, or maybe read in bed or something like this. This is
watch some Revive Stronger, maybe.
Yeah, actually, we have Greg Potter coming on the podcast, who's a sleep expert, and he recommended listening to a podcast in bed. He was like, you don't need a screen or anything; you can just listen to it and fall off to sleep. But they probably want to make notes from the Revive Stronger podcast, so maybe not the best one.
They can watch the improvement season as well. That's
yeah. So then, that's a good one to chill out to. So then about an hour before bed, I try and have a hot shower for, if I can make it, like 5 to 10 minutes. That's a long time to shower for me. I'm normally like a 1 minute guy. So I try and like brush my teeth in the shower and like try and exfoliate somewhat or something to try and bide my time. A hot shower. So what this does is it will kind of heat the skin, and that will kind of cause your body, what's it called? Your inner body temperature to come down. So that is what's required for you to fall to sleep. So you need your kind of core body temperature to come down. That initiates sleep. So doing that about an hour before you go to bed, having a hot shower, having a bath. A bath would be great if you can have a bath, or even using in Europe, quite a lot of places have saunas, right, in their actual houses. So a sauna would be awesome. Doing that about an hour before bed for about 10 minutes. That would be really great. And then doing all of that, and then I sometimes been trialing wearing socks in bed. There's some evidence to show that that helps. So I sometimes kind of trial having them, don't have them. And then in terms of supplementation, the only thing I use is magnesium. This is because I'm probably deficient in it, and there is some decent evidence to support its use. I use biglycinate. Citrate would be fine. I like biglycinate because it's got the glycinate there as well, which has some evidence supporting its use for before bed as well.
The amino acid, you say?
I think it is amino acid, yeah. Or glycine. That's what it's called.
Oh, yeah.
Not glycinate. So that has been shown to have some evidence behind it. A lot of the supplements are kind of a bit hit and miss for sleep. A lot of them are more like theoretical based. So like 5-HTP, I've tried that. I've also tried ashwagandha. I've tried some adaptogens. Haven't really found that they make a noticeable difference. So they're very expensive. So I don't generally recommend many supplements before bed. There are things like valerian root, which actually has quite a lot of evidence behind it. Lemon balm, lavender. These are kind of sedatives that you can trial as well. I think lavender is cool because it smells pretty like relaxing, and by having that smell, it could well have some sort of placebo effect that could help sleep. So those are some of the things people can mess around with. But I think importantly is having a routine. So what I outlined there, I try and get to bed within the same half an hour and get up within the same half an hour every single day, even on the weekend if I can. Circadian rhythm is really quite important, and the body loves these rhythms. So if you can get that. And then finally, I give myself an unnegotiable 8 hours every single night where I can. Everyone can't do that, but less than 6 hours, you're really, really looking at some bad effects. You'll find out in reading Matthew Walker's book. There's some really scary stuff that happens if you get less than 6 hours. He recommends not less than 7. And I think for us guys who are training hard, we want 8 hours plus. So I try and give myself an unnegotiable 8 hours of sleeping opportunity. That probably describes most of the things I do. I might have forgotten something, but I think that probably gives people quite a lot.
You once mentioned, what was it, white noise or brown noise?
Yes. So it is white noise. Basically, it's just a continuous noise that blocks out other things. So making a room like a cave is really quite great. You want to make it cool. You want to make it dark. These are important for being able to sleep. So for a lot of people, that means opening their window. I unfortunately have a train track literally right outside the window, so it's super loud. So I have a fan that kind of obviously helps keep the room cool, but also acts as white noise. I sleep with an eye mask on as well because I can't have blackout blinds, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. You also mentioned not drinking coffee 8 or 9 hours prior sleep. I have the same thing. When I drink coffee, even 6 or 7 hours after that, I still feel that I drank coffee.
The worst thing is what I can remember at university having nights where I'd have, I think they were called like Monster Bombs or something. What are they called? I can't even remember what they're called. It was basically Red Bull with like alcohol, with, what was it called? Jaeger bombs. That's what they were called. So that was a nasty situation because that's kind of stimulant and depressant at the same time. And also alcohol and caffeine has been shown to impair sleep quality. So if people are drinking, I would recommend kind of moderating that and limiting that before bed, especially. Obviously, most people drink in the evening, so it's pretty hard, but it's going to negatively impact your sleep. Whilst you might find getting to sleep is quite easy because it's a bit like sedative, your quality will be worse, which is unfortunate. And then also something I didn't mention was I've been trying to make sure that I don't eat too much before bed. That has been shown to disrupt sleep. So I try and kind of eat most of my last big meal within 2 hours of bed. And then if I have anything else, it's just like a protein top off, like that casein protein I talked about within like an hour or half an hour before bed. I just find that's probably going to help with sleep.
Yeah, good
For
stuff.
people, especially if they're massing. If you're dieting, you probably can't ever eat enough to disrupt your sleep.
Yeah, I remember like I still remember to this day the 1 or 2 times I was hungry before going to bed. Like it's just nasty.
Yeah. So when you're dieting, I wouldn't worry about the eating before bed so much.
So nasty. Yeah, I wanted to mention something here at the end. You were saying you never tried L-theanine, right?
I don't think anything. No, because I tried some products. I don't think any of them had L-theanine in them. I've only ever had that within pre-workouts.
Yeah, it works good with caffeine as well.
Yeah, they kind of work synergistically. You don't get
Yeah.
the jitters, you get more like focus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, talking about sleep as well. Have you read? I guess it's even somewhere here. Have you read the book Willpower by Roy Baumeister?
I haven't read that, no.
Oh, you will love it. It's a book just based on willpower. So there's like one psychologist. He researched willpower for like 10 or 20 years. And he has just written a book about willpower, what to do to strengthen willpower, what happens when it breaks down. I guess you intuitively know what happens because you competed, you had like a harsh diet. So, for example, what I realized during my diet is when blood sugar is low, your willpower is also low. So
Right.
then I realized before I was going to work, I was always making sure to eat like 100, 200 calories in forms of carbs before I went into work. Because when I went in without eating my carbs, like prior stepping into the door, I was super reactive and super stressed, and I was not really able to use willpower to interact with my colleagues anymore because I was so depleted. I just came from the gym back then, so I always had to eat something before I started to interact with people. Like it was interesting.
No, yeah, that is interesting. It's Hunger is real when you're on a diet. It's unfortunate. Whatever you
Yeah.
can do to reduce that.
Yeah, and especially low sleep, because as soon as you don't sleep enough, also your willpower is depleted. It's super nasty.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I guess you hear that also a lot with people that kind of brag with, I just sleep like 4 or 5 hours a night. I hustle all day long. Then I'm like, dude, if you really would sleep 8 hours, you would need to work half the time and you would get the same stuff done.
Yeah, it's scary because a lot of the kind of I even saw it. I think it was last night. We even watched Shark Tank, where it's like big business owners and people come in, and someone came in with a product about kind of having naps at work, and the guy was like, "I'd never ever get that at work because I have 4 to 5 hours of sleep every night, and I don't want anyone that I employ to be working on the job. This is ridiculous." And I was just like, "Oh my gosh, he does not even realize. Not only is kind of the advice of I'll sleep when I'm dead." That's mortally unwise advice, as Matthew Walker would say, because you're literally shortening your life
Yes.
by doing that, which is ridiculous. And yes, you're completely right. Your productivity is worse. Your kind of memory foundation, your learning is worse. All of these things, the brain just does not function well with poor sleep.
Yes. Good point here at the end. So where can people contact you in the best way?
Cool. So I always recommend people head over to revivestronger.com. That's where they can find out about the podcast, any articles we've got over there, all the coaches, any seminars that are going on. So that's a great place. And then if anyone wants to contact me personally, probably Revive Stronger over on Instagram is the best place. I really love interacting with people over on there, and it's somewhere I like spending quite a lot of time and try and provide as much value as I can.
Talking about the seminar, there's one coming next month.
There is, yes. Good little plug. So we have Mike Israetel, who's a hypertrophy expert, muscle growth, a lot of the stuff I talked about. He knows a lot more than I do. So if you thought I knew a lot, you're going to be blown away by him. With Gabrielle Fondero, who is a gut health expert, another very interesting area. She is not a guru. She really tells it how it is, which is super refreshing within that arena. And then we have James Hoffman as well, who is the other end. So he is recovery, which is super important. So he knows a lot about sleep. He knows a lot about all the different recovery modalities and which ones actually help and which ones don't do much. So it's going to be fantastic. That's the 11th and 12th of May. I think we still have some VIP tickets left even, which is surprising. They normally go very, very quickly. I think we've got like 1 or 2 left. And then there are general tickets available as well. So yeah, it'd be amazing to see people there.
Yeah, it's also just great for like networking. The last time I was at your guys' seminar, the guys and the girls you meet there is just like astonishing. Like everyone is like almost like immersed in this scientific based training community. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think this one is going to blow you away even more because these are the real geeks who are coming in here.
Yeah, I'm actually staying with your other client Arne Otte. I
Oh,
asked.
awesome. That's
Yeah,
great.
because I have like this weird it's not a personality trait, but when I see people on social media that I kind of look up to, I want to be friends with them immediately. I do whatever it takes. I want to meet them, like give them some value. And that was like I thought like that with you when I saw you and Pascal. I was like, these guys are awesome. I need to meet them. And I thought the same about Arne. So I know his one of his clients, and I asked him, hey dude, you guys have an Airbnb, right? Can I stay with you? And he's like, yeah, man, sure, just join us. So I'm
That's
like,
really
I'm
cool. I
staying
love
with
that.
Arne. He also has a really good German podcast as well. So if you like German people listening, you can go over to his podcast. He's also like dope.
Yeah, Arnie's great. He's a really, really genuine guy and jacked.
Yeah. I mean, Revive Stronger especially attracts a specific type of people, and they're also all really nice, really down to earth.
Yeah, I mean, so every time someone kind of even just a post into the group and the feedback people get, but when we introduce a new client and everyone just comes in and comments, like I love it. And Charles, you are you're an important part of that. Every single person is. And yeah, people like you make the brand what it is, make the community what it is. And I love being part of it. It's incredible.
Yeah, you guys do important work. So for everyone listening here, go down to the comments. I will put the YouTube channel, the podcast there. And don't be afraid if you don't understand everything. When I started listening to the podcast, especially because I'm not English native, sometimes I had to Google some stuff, but it will be fine.
Definitely. And then if you comment in those videos, Pascal will be answering all your questions and he's more than happy to do those.
Yeah, just mention how huge Steve is. It's always appreciated. So do you have an end message to the viewers?
I don't think I do. All I would say is I don't know. Consistency is key. Like, I'll just drive that home. With muscle growth, what we were talking about, kind of learn the principles, learn the foundations, get the basic ones right in terms of overload, fatigue management, progressive overload, specificity, train with a specific goal in mind, get those in place, be consistent with it, eat in a surplus. You will grow. It might be slow. It might not be to the speed that you want, but be consistent and you will dramatically change your physique, and you can revive stronger too. So it's probably a nice way to end it.
Awesome. That's exactly what I'm doing, reviving stronger. Awesome. So thank you, Steve, for being here. I really appreciate the time. Guys, check out his channel, check out the podcast. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Charles. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.